hand over to those who are going to be making their submissions. So I invite, first of all, our submissions from, well, the closing statement from Gloriavale, and I believe, yes, there's Mr. Shannon. Good morning, Mr. Shannon. Thank you for appearing again today. Would you like to introduce yourself, and then we will be happy to hear from you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Chris Shannon. I'm appearing with Ms. Sykes for Gloriavale. I'm a Pakeha male, middle-aged, glasses, perhaps need a haircut, and wearing a mid-blue suit, and I'm non-disabled.
Just bring the microphone a bit closer to you, Mr. Shannon. We're just not sure if it's going to make any difference. Thank you.
Hear me better now?
Yes, that's a little better. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Right. Well, parents at Gloriavale, like Rachel Steadfast, have hopes and dreams for their children, just as other parents do. They want their children to live healthy lives unaffected by the blight of abuse. Rachel Steadfast has said that in the community, parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, teachers, leaders, we all want our children to protect our children and make sure they're safe and well cared for. And of course, this says we want new policies, ongoing education, and amended practices to prevent abuse of our children. This is the natural human response. We wanted these changes for ourselves. So it is that Gloriavale has made changes in its practices, changes in terms of policies, in terms of education, and in terms of family time. And that's been supported by external agencies as Howard Temple recognises that the community can't walk alone in these changes. It's been percolated from the top down, as he told you, and there are notes that you'll have the notes that he had when he was educating community members on the child protection, safety and wellbeing policy. In this closing, I'll deal first with some preliminary comments, then with the aspects of the evidence, then last with a brief response to some of the leaders and conclude. Well, in terms of preliminary comments, as you know, this inquiry is not about freedom of religion or freedom of association. Rachel Steadfast, Howard Temple and other members of the Gloriavale are entitled to choose their own religious beliefs, to wear whatever clothing they like, just as other New Zealanders. And our laws have recognised such freedoms which protect us all. Some segments of the media choose to continually criticise Gloriavale and its residents. They label it a cult and generalise and judge people there. There's a risk of that approach promoting intolerance, of taking the unacceptable behaviour of certain individuals and generalising towards a whole group. If something bad happens in the suburb of Sockburn, we don't say that Christchurch is a bad place. But too often that distinction is not applied to Gloriavale. Many groups in our society face prejudice for being different, for wearing the wrong clothes, for not being mainstream, or for holding conservative beliefs. Gloriavale residents are no exception to that. Now, that's not to say that there have not been issues with the historic handling of abuse. There have been. Howard Temple accepts that. Gloriavale's particular history is tied up with Hopeful Christian, who died in May 2018. And there's been a change in leadership style since Howard Temple took over as overseeing shepherd. Howard Temple consults more and has a more open leadership style. You will have seen during his evidence that Mr. Temple just tried to tell the truth, irrespective of how that came across. He didn't seek to defend the indefensible. He's no autocrat. He went to police himself in 2020. He and other leaders have taken expert advice from Oranga Tamariki, safeguarding children and others. changes have been made in implementing the Child Protection Leads Group, and Rachel Steadfast told you about how there were women and young people on that group to increase avenues for reporting. And despite the extensive scrutiny this community has undergone, neither police nor Oranga Tamariki have suggested any lack of cooperation or reluctance to participate in change on their part in recent times. Indeed, in 2020, police acknowledged the clear support both the leadership and community have provided to the police in that investigation. There was a question one of the commissioners asked about whether a transcript or video would be sent to members of the community so that they could see what was going on for themselves. Well, the morning after the hearing, an email was sent with a link to the video so that members of the community could see the video for themselves, and that was sent to households. And that's consistent with increasing transparency of what's going on. The predominant factor allowing incidents of abuse and inappropriate behaviour in the past was personal more than doctrinal, I suggest. The impact of a particular leader, hopeful Christian, on the then culture is a circumstance which is perhaps unique to Gloriavale compared to the other faiths that you will have heard from. Under a different leader, the community's changed significantly and in beneficial ways. Turning to the evidence, the Commission heard evidence in chief from Gloriavale's witnesses for just over 10 minutes. That was followed by about 4.5 hours of cross-examination and Commissioner's questions. That having time spent on cross-examination that's approaching 40 times longer than evidence in chief inevitably tends to accentuate the negative. No re-examination time is allocated. Now, the public hearings are necessarily a snapshot of all the evidence that you've received beforehand, and they can't show the whole picture. We're only seeing publicly part of it. There were many questions about the What We Believe document from 1989, and that was being, sections of that were impugned in the questioning. However, it is an historic document from over 30 years ago. It reflects a different leadership, a different time, and is very different to the current version. The 1989 document's over 150 pages long, and a few clauses from it which you have in questioning. The current version is only about 11 pages long. And in questioning, a literal interpretation was taken of that 1989 document, assuming no divergence between practice and what was written on paper. However, the 1989 document included things like, therefore, as Christians, we must fulfill Christ's plain commandment, be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. No mention was made of that, and certainly no literal interpretation was made. There was quite a bit of questioning about the travelling away from the church and the need to have the full approval and blessing of leaders, and it was suggested that that was for control in the 1989 document. However, practice has differed. Rachel Steadfast says, while I may at times advise community leaders of my travel plans if I happen to be in discussion, most times I travel away, I do so without their knowledge. There were also questions about police reporting on their police operation Minneapolis in 2020. 3 points are made about that. First, police said 61 young people are identified as involving in harmful sexual behaviours, either as offenders, peers, or victims. The status of someone as a peer seems unfair, and there's not a clear split as to numbers in each category. The second point is that the focus of that operation was on interactions between some young people, And that's a different issue between adults and children. And that was why it was important to keep a closer eye on what young people did and to educate them on appropriate behaviour. Third, many or most of those young people referred to will be victims that still live in Gloriavale. The question then is, how can we help them? Well, counselling and support are being offered, and all victims should be treated with respect wherever they are. There shouldn't be two tiers of survivor. One that's the vocal leavers group, or some vocal leavers, on the one hand, and then those that are inside the community or outside the community but are just less vocal. Constant criticism of Gloriavale runs the risk of insensitivity to survivors within the community. On the topic of abuse, Howard Temple was asked about during the hearing whether some victims were required in the past to apologise before the whole congregation or to forgive offenders before the whole congregation. And he said that was possibly the case. His response was vague. However, Rachel Steadfast has confirmed in her second witness statement that in her entire life in the community, she's never seen nor heard of someone appearing in front of the full congregation to forgive a perpetrator. It's submitted that she's right about that, and Howard Temple has accepted that on reflection he can't recall a victim ever appearing before the congregation to forgive an offender. Towards the end of the hearing, one of the commissioners suggested that the community is slow to respond to abuse allegations, but for the presence of government agencies. That's not accepted. When community leaders and members learned about the findings of Police Operation Minneapolis, they wanted and implemented changes. It wasn't about obliging state agencies, but of the welfare of their families. I mean, who loves a child more than their own parents, grandparents, and Wailohana? There were some references in the evidence to state agencies. However, Gloriavale's experience is that agencies such as Oranga Tamariki and police have been professional, helpful, and offered a degree of expertise that the community simply didn't have without them. And how people recognises that the community can't walk alone, and no blame's been placed on state agencies. Their support's been welcomed and embraced. During that hearing, questions were asked about the treatment of Priya, the 14-year-old girl who tragically choked and died choked on a piece of meat and died in about 2015. And you'll remember Rachel Steadfast's reaction to that, how emotional she was. It reflects that Priya was a much-loved member of the community. Council assisting the Commission asked about the circumstances surrounding Priya's death and cited the door handle being removed from the door. Well, generalised references about Gloriavale having done that conceals that one person was responsible for removing a door handle, and that wasn't the cause of Priya's death. The coroner confirmed the cause was asphyxia caused by a piece of meat blocking her airway. The coroner states that a number of people went into the room to try and help her via a window. And the coroner determined that the disabling of the door handle did not contribute to Priya's death in any way. McGill forceps are the tool that ambulance officers usually carry to try and extract obstructions. But households, almost no households will have such a tool. And the community as a whole shouldn't be impugned as responsible for this terrible accident. Finally, a few comments on the incorporation of Māori culture in the community. Look, the community is not part of the state and is under no obligation to practice aspects of Māori culture. although the school and early childhood centres may be subject to obligations in that respect. That said, the community does voluntarily teach and use Te Reo Māori, Waiata and other tikanga. It has done for years. As Rachel Steadfast explained, this comes from a genuine passion for learning our national language and a core part of New Zealand's culture and history. She explained that culture can have different meanings and that Christianity is the dominant culture in Gloriavale. And so she explained that Māori culture will be taught and incorporated up to the point that it conflicts with Christianity. For example, Māori gods and origin stories are not taught, as that differs from the community's religious beliefs. The community has no objection to learning and using Te Reo Māori and aspects of tikanga and do so. Ms. Steadfast explained that aligned with Gloriavale's beliefs and practices, a tradition of communal living, family relationships that extend beyond the nuclear family, as with whānau, and a spiritual leadership model that's common in both communities. I'll respond briefly to witness statements of Ms. Overcomer and other leaders. Ms. Overcomer made an opening address on behalf of the Gloriavale Leaders Trust at the start of the hearing of this aspect, and she described key causes of abuse in the community as hopeful Christian holding the overseas shepherd rod, the community seeking to resolve issues internally without involving external agencies, prioritising communal living over family relationships, and a lack of written policies and procedures in place for addressing abuse allegations. As explained in the evidence of Howard Temple and Rachel Steadfast, each of these possible contributing factors has been addressed in the 9 years since Ms. Overcomer left the community. A change has been made. It doesn't represent the current position nor the position for some years. The Leaders Trust represents a small group of individuals who have left the community who regularly bring litigation proceedings against members of the community. This particularly vocal group of leaders doesn't include every person who has left the community. Necessarily, people who have left the community years ago will not have recent experience of what it's like to live in Gloriavale. The Leaders Trust cannot be considered representative of the wider Gloriavale of the community or representative of those who have left. The Leaders Trust has never been transparent about how many people it speaks for and with what authority. Undoubtedly it speaks for some, but it's not clear who and for what purpose. The questions were asked of Howard Temple about not reaching out to survivors before now. However, there are a number of ongoing civil proceedings brought by leaders against Gloriavale leadership, and care needs to be taken about when and how any reaching out is done in light of live proceedings. Now, all of this is not to say that there haven't been instances of abuse and abuse in the past. Gloriavale has repeatedly and openly acknowledged mistakes were made. However, the leaders have provided evidence to the Commission through an historical lens without the benefit of living through the period of change that's occurred in the community since. To conclude, you've received evidence from two Gloriavale witnesses explaining these changes. Both of them expressed genuine intent to continue the culture shift at Gloriavale to ensure that any abusive practices of the past are never repeated.
Thank you, Mr. Shannon. Just in relation to the extra evidence that was being provided by Ms. Steadfast and Mr. Temple, I can assure you we have received those and they will go up on our website. in the interests of clarity and transparency. Thank you for your confirmation that the video of the proceedings, or the link to that, has been sent to the community. That is helpful. And thank you for presenting so clearly the concerns of Gloriavale in relation to the hearing and putting the balance, in their view, back. That is important. We have listened carefully, and everything that you have said today will certainly be taken into account when we are reaching our decisions. And just so that everybody knows, this isn't the end of the opportunity for all parties to comment. There will be we have a strong natural justice process whereby whatever we write, if it's adverse against a group or an individual, that person will have the opportunity to comment before we reach a final decision on that matter. So just to assure your clients, the Gloriavale community, that we will continue stringently to follow that natural justice process. So thank you very much indeed to you for your submissions, and thank you to Ms. Temple and Ms. Steadfast for making themselves available during the hearing, and for providing, through your team probably, all the information that has been very valuable contribution to our work. So thank you very much, and thank you. That brings us then to